Good afternoon. Chairman Easley, members of the board, representatives of Governor Meade. First, a thank you from the South. You power the South. We've used Powder River Basin for more than 2 decades to fuel some of our largest facilities. We intend to continue to do that. Powder River Basin is an economic choice for us, as well as a choice that works well with the technology that we chose during the aftermath of the 1990 Clean Air Act Amendment. So the tie between Powder River Basin and Southern is real. I think we also share a very special bond in that I think we are regions and companies and supporting companies like you who really do want to preserve coal. I think that is a mission that we have taken on for a variety of reasons. But let me tell you a little bit about that before I launch into Kemper, because it might help explain the Kemper phenomenon and why we would do what we did with Kemper and why we've done what we've done. Southern Company is about 100 years old. We've been in the Southeast for all of our history, except for a brief foray internationally in the 80s and 90s. When we looked at those, I think the number from Ben was 3.6 billion people living in energy poverty. It's easy to forget that energy poverty is an American problem, a relatively recent American problem. The Southeast was probably one of the least developed regions of the United States for generations. I often tell the story of my mother, who I saw on Sunday. She grew up in North Alabama, and for her first 12 years of life, she had no electricity and no running water. And her story was not uncommon. My parent company that I first started doing legal work for, Alabama Power Company, was still doing interconnections in the 60s and 70s for first-time electric customers. That history and how far we've advanced, and in those days using hydro and coal in order to provide that power, is a remarkable story of American development. There are people waiting all over the world to have the same opportunity that my mother had and that our region had. And coal has to be a part of that solution. You saw the numbers from Ben's presentation, which I was also going to cite, that China, India, large parts of Asia, Eastern Europe, Africa, all of those regions will have to look to coal. Natural gas is a bountiful and a wonderful blessing for those who have it, but for most of the world, it is not a reasonably accessible or inexpensive resource. And so coal, abundant, relatively cheap, if used correctly, can provide a solution to what we should view as one of the most pressing environmental problems of our age. Leaving 3.6 billion human beings in energy poverty would be an international tragedy. And I think the U.S. can have a large role in solving that. But one of the things we must do is what you're doing through the WIA, what others of us have been doing in the Southeast, what folks have been doing in Canada. And that is seek a way to use coal in a clean, effective, affordable way so that generations to come will benefit from it and the world will benefit from it. And you say, well, why does Southern Company hold this to be such a core value? The one thing that we tell ourselves, and that Tom Fanning, our chairman, has often said, is we're sort of really, as the governor put it this morning, an all of the above company. We always have been. And the reason we've been is because experience has taught us that if we come to rely on one fuel to the exclusion of others, then we will hurt our customers, and in the long run, we will hurt our region. And so we have always had the idea that fuel diversity is at the core of our business, and thus a value that we have to protect. And so, not surprisingly, Southern Company today is investing in Kemper, which I'll talk about, but we're also building the nation's first 2 new nuclear units in a generation. We completed several years ago one of the largest biomass facilities in the country in Texas. We purchased and participated in solar development in 4 to 5 western states. We're importing large quantities of good old western wind right into the heart of Georgia. We bring PRB in, we bring Illinois Basin coal in. We use regionally available coal as well. We also have used coal from Colombia. And the reason we do that is because we've found that volatility is not your friend when you're trying to run a stable business, and particularly one that is a public service where the receipt of a monthly bill is not a welcome occurrence. It is a painful reminder of the cost of progress and the cost of well-being, but it is never welcome. And seeing cost escalate and go out of kilter because of fuel suddenly spikes is a very difficult thing to explain to a customer. And while we've welcomed the gas revolution and taken full advantage of it, we've swung from 70% coal to something like 43% coal during the last several years as the fracking revolution has taken off. But we do not take for granted that we will always have the benefit of low-cost gas. And if we did, we would be betting the well-being of our region, our customers, and the well-being of our shareholders on that. And so we have said that one of the things that we want to do to preserve the well-being of the region is to preserve the coal option for generations to come. I'm reminded of the scale of time it takes to do things like this. And you'll see the dates on Kemper and you'll think, well, that's a relatively new development that they got themselves into. But actually, Kemper was in partnership with the Department of Energy, started as long ago as the late 1980s. So we've been at the developmental process for research and development leading to the Kemper development for, close on 40 years. And I think what that teaches is that this is a process where patience is demanded and where scale up can be dramatically different than what you think it is. And that anyone who says that creating something new and so radically different is going to be easy, I'm afraid to tell them that some of the best engineers in the Southeast, good products of Georgia Tech and Auburn and MIT and a few other places around the world, have faced their share of challenges in doing something new, unique, something important, but something that is not easy by any stretch. We had a number of people ask me the question, what can you do to avoid being a company that produces a KW number like the one that you saw? I thought it was 13,000, and that may be a low number. The answer that I always give is don't be the first company to do it. It'll be better. The good news that I've had is we've had visitors from around the world and from other industries visit. There were two guests I wanted to hug here recently. One of them said of the plant, an engineer and executive with an oil and gas enterprise, said, well, no one would ever ask, looking at this place, where the money went. It's right here. You see it. And the other comment was, you did all of this for $6 billion? And I was thinking, yeah, but there may be more. And there is much to tell you about that $6 billion. I do want to share a little bit now of the story of Kemper. I do want to put it in a context that involves some of our good partners here in the room, including Dr. Julio Friedman, who for years has been an amazing advocate for clean coal, not only in the U.S. but worldwide, and has been a good partner and leader for not only the company but and the enterprise that we've been engaged in jointly, but also for the U.S. I think the fact that we're members of CURT and for years have looked to Ben Yamagata for leadership tells you that we have been on this search with you for a very long time, looking for the right answers on coal. And I think the other thing that we would tell you is that this has been an administration that has been very challenging to the coal enterprise. I would stay with you tomorrow, but as I said, I've got to rush back for a coal combustion residue meeting that looks at the next aspect of what we're going to do to control and utilize coal. And so the challenges continue just across the board. And so with that, let me get right to Kemper. And to do that, first, let me show you the baby. I think the phrase, maybe it was Ben, a path forward. This indeed may represent a path forward, but we also want to be straightforward about what it is a path forward for. This is a path forward for probably 50%, 40% of the world's coal. This technology was designed, built, and engineered focused on low-ranked coals. It is not a universal answer for the production of gasified coal. It is, however, an answer that is widely applicable in the United States. It is also one that has great application worldwide. And so we believe that Kemper County can provide a way forward. But there are some questions about it, and I want to maybe address some of those as we move along. One of the reasons that we did this was actually Hurricane Katrina. You may remember that our Mississippi company, Mississippi Power Company, was devastated by Hurricane Katrina. And one of the things that we realized is that we had too much of our generation on the coast. And we had inundation at one plant and danger to another. And so we said we have to get some of the generation off the coast. Our good neighbors to the north, TVA, actually allowed us to come in and start building Kemper outside of our service territory, which required transmission construction. And that facility will help balance us regionally and also protect us from hurricanes. So at the heart of this is sort of a reliability kernel that's important to remember. You'll also remember that lignite ban, which I'll show you in a minute, has been, for the most part, underutilized. And so we wanted to take advantage of that economically, along with TVA, who had previously put a plant in there. One of the interesting things about this is that Mississippi Power Company is actually one of our smaller subsidiaries. It has 1,300 employees. I think when Kemper is complete, it'll have at the plant 220 employees. So you can see what a large percentage of the employees will be associated with work at Kemper. And a lot of the fuel support and other things of the central office functions will be provided by a relatively small company. It's also been a challenge because that company has far fewer customers to spread cost across. And as a result, the system has had to look at this and ask itself, how is this benefiting the system? And we go back to the things that I talked about before, demonstrating fuel diversity and the ability to build a new facility. So there was this value that I talked about before is demonstrated by the numbers for Mississippi Power. If we had left well enough alone and never pursued Kemper, we would have been 75% natural gas dependent in Mississippi, in a region where gas can be in very high demand for industrial use. And so by looking to the lignite seam and bringing coal into play, we were able to balance that out and give it a better look at about 50-50. And that comes as a result of some of the retirements that were mentioned of some of our older coal units on the coast. So even after those retirements, we're going to have a balanced energy portfolio. Again, something we think is valuable, something we think that the policymakers in Washington should value. We also wanted these other benefits. We wanted fuel price stability because the lignite is very, very cheap. It's cheap to mine. It has a very small environmental profile. You may remember that Kemper, despite the fact that it has an amazing environmental profile, which I can go over, we actually did get quite a bit of environmental opposition to the plant and to the siting of the plant. And at some point, I think our then CEO sat down and talked to some of the leading environmental groups and says, I don't understand. We're near zero emissions on water. Our air emissions are comparable or if not lower than a natural gas facility. And for the first time, we're demonstrating the capture and sequestration of carbon, something that the world has been looking for. After all, there were supposed to be 10 Kempers in Europe already. There are none. So how is it that we're getting opposition from you in developing what should be a welcome addition to America's electricity generation portfolio? And the answer was, we don't like mining. Well, I think there was one group of Westerners who owned some coal out in the far west, and they came and looked at our mine, and they said, that's not a mine, that's a parking lot. The footprint as you bring up that lignite and get it over to the plant, which is literally a hop, skip, and a jump away, is minimal. And the recovery of that land, according to practices from a good North Dakota company who's helping us run it, will return it to a state that in many ways will improve it, which even though we love our red dirt and our pine trees, it isn't hard to improve it. You can make it look a lot better, and they do. So over time, we have no doubt that the environmental profile of this plant will be acceptable. But I think that story should illustrate something larger. I'm sorry. The great thing about being a clean air lawyer who suffers from asthma is that I'm actually the guy the EPA is trying to protect. So I'm always with them in one sense. But I do have a bit of a voice thing. I apologize. The war on coal is not a war on coal. It's a war on combustion. We met with a group of environmentalists, about 20 environmental groups, 2 weeks ago. They reiterated to us in the strongest possible terms that their objection was not just to coal, but it was to gas and it was to nuclear. And so they wanted to be beyond three of the things that we're relying on to provide most of the electricity in the Southeast, beyond our nuclear fleet, beyond our gas fleet, and beyond our coal fleet. Beyond that is nothing. You couldn't support the grid in the Southeast with what we have remaining, even though we have great hydro and we have renewable resources that we import. But you couldn't run a first world economy if you're beyond the things that they talk about. Often I've despaired over the fact that the oil and gas industry and the coal industry are separated seemingly when it comes to advocating policies in Washington. I think there's some short-sightedness. Ask not for whom the bell tolls. The clear intent is carbon capture and sequestration on gas just as on coal. The lessons that we're trying to learn at Kemper will have as much applicability to gas units as they will to coal. Anyone who thinks that this is not, in the end, a disagreement over extraction, use of resource, transportation, pipeline, all of those things, is missing the fact that we're in a fundamental disagreement with a large part of our citizenry over how we use resources and which resources we use. Now, the burden then shifts to us, which is, okay, if we want to utilize them, then we have to do it in a more efficient, environmentally attractive way. So Kemper, we thought, provided just about every aspect of that and would do so for not only for the United States, but potentially for the world where you have large quantities of low-rent coal. And as you can see, I don't think this picture is probably very different from many places, even in Texas, where you have these large lignite seams. And that crescent of lignite runs right through the heart of Mississippi. And it has really been an untapped resource. There's one other plant that we run for TVA that sits on that lignite belt. But it is very poor quality coal. As you can see, its BTU content is very, very low. The moisture content, which at some level is a problem, fortunately for us, the gasifier that we're using, the gasification technology, deals pretty well with probably 20 to 25% moisture, but not 45%. So we have to do some drying. But what we figured out, and this goes to the China problem, is that extracting the water from that low-rent coal actually helps us provide the makeup water for the rest of the plant. And so that's helped us reduce the water footprint of the plant tremendously. And that's something that we're hoping could have application around the world. We don't have to transport very far. As I said, the good folks at North American Mining are set up right next door to us. We've already gotten almost 1 million tons of lignite ready to go. And the TRIG technology really was designed to get at lignite and other low-rank coals. So we had done the laboratory research for years with the help of DOE to demonstrate that we could operate the technology. So we felt pretty confident that we could do it. Pointed out that one of the things, and Karl Moor was talking about, was the products market. And one of the driving forces behind the decision to move forward with Kemper is that we would have other saleable byproducts, including carbon capture at 65%, which we could use for EOR in Mississippi and elsewhere, sulfuric acid, ammonia. And those products and their sales, the commercial contracts that we entered into, which were really first of a kind in Mississippi, help justify in part the economics of Kemper on the going-in basis. Also, the fact that we could take treated effluent from Meridian down the way through a pipeline, use it at the plant, and eventually become basically a zero liquid discharge facility, all meant good things for the community and good things about the future of power development. And not surprisingly, when you do a project this big, you can produce real economic benefits in a very poor region of our state. Kemper County is one of the poorest regions of Mississippi, one of the poorest counties of Mississippi. And this alone has been a dramatic story. At peak, We had 7,000 construction workers on site moving around in there, and I think that population probably, I think it about equaled half the overall Kemper County population at one point or another. The richest person in the county is the person who developed the biscuit that is sold down the road at a gas station for about $4 a pop, and they have done very well. So it really does have a spin-off business effect. The gasification technology that DOE helped us develop over the years was a very unusual configuration. It is not what you typically think about when you think about a gasifier. This very strange construction of piping that you see is basically designed to, if you will, not spontaneously combust, but vaporize the coal as it moves around the pipe with the legs serving as residue spaces, and the force and the forces that are work move the coal, which has been finely ground around that and produces the syngas that we then clean up through a fairly complex process. This was not an effort that we did alone. As I said, there were 30 years of work on the development of it. I know some of you have visited the Power Systems Development Facility and seen the unit that was the basis for the work that we did at Kemper, the TRIG gasifier there. That, again, gave us hope that we really could scale up pretty easily. And the good news is the facility has actually, because it utilizes coal, has proven to be a good home for the U.S. National Carbon Capture Center. And again, I hope many of you will come down and visit it and see it, because a host of technologies, both post and pre-combustion, are being tested at the center on a coal unit that is nearby, and then from the TRIG unit as well. So it has a continuing benefit, and that's one of the partnerships that I think we could develop is on the research, and there are very few of us in the world that are still doing this. I think we're down to only a couple of really dedicated research institutes with some new help from China. This is just a part of what we've been doing on CO2, 5 minutes. We've actually been doing post-combustion testing down at our plant Berry with Mitsubishi. We built a 25 megawatt post-combustion facility and then put about 200,000 tons of CO2 in a saline reservoir to test whether or not it's used for EOR, we could still store, capture and store carbon in our geology. And for good news for us, our southern portion of our service territory has fairly good geology. We've also done storage assessments around the system in order to figure out whether or not we can safely store CO2. And a part of the driver for this is we think that it's somewhere in maybe the not too distant future, the convergence of two things: the potential for a CO2 market for EOR and other uses underground could develop as natural sources of CO2 become scarcer. That's what happened to us in Mississippi. Maybe over time there's a convergence between the utility industry and the oil and gas industry in seeking ways to produce CO2 and electricity simultaneously. We'll be glad for that. This is the impact that we've been able to have in Mississippi, feeding in from Kemper through that dotted line that you see on the right. So, you know, you think about an effort like this, and we're entering our 5th year of construction, and you can see the scale, the effort, and this is when our combustion turbine came into operation in 14. And we're about there, June 14, and we're nearing construction. And before I sat down, I did want to sort of give you a sense of where we are in that process. We think we're about 92% towards completion. We think that we'll have this year the first firing of the gasifier. The process and procedures that we're using in this are new to the utility industry. Most of them are based on the chemical industry, which was new and different to us. It's required a whole new level of training, procedures, and process that we really weren't prepared for. I think the challenge that we'll have is that over the course of this year, we want to ramp into startup midway through next year. That is our stated goal. We've slipped several times, and we've spent a lot of money. Let me talk about the money. We had agreed originally on about a $2.8 billion arrangement with the Public Service Commission based on the economics of both the deals that we had done for the side products as well as the electricity, and sale of a portion of this to friends and allies in the public power sector. As costs continued to get ahead of us, we found that there was a need to securitize about an additional $1 billion worth of money. But we continue the commitment that we made to the Public Service Commission in Mississippi and to the people in Mississippi that they would never see any cost increases above what we had committed to do in the rate proceeding. And so the remaining amounts of money that have been coming out have basically come out of the bottom line. They've come out of the stockholders' pockets. They have been, I think, I'd say over the last 8 quarters, we've written off substantially. In other words, we've invested probably something on the order of $3 billion worth of Southern Company money in the development of this technology. That's a crucible. Most companies would tell you that's a crucible. It is not an easy thing to do. Particularly not an easy thing to do for a company that prides itself on its engineering skill and its acumen. But I ask myself often, because now I really have been asked to go not only in the US, but abroad to talk about this technology and work to expand it, because the only place where this technology probably can be deployed in the foreseeable future is abroad. And if we want to see it go beyond where it is in Kemper and come back to us when we need it, we've got to send it abroad. We have to get it into China. We have to get it into Eastern Europe. We have to make version number 2 far better and far more efficient. So let me assure you of one thing. We're a stubborn company. We tend to have that reputation. And I think that if you ask us, would you do it all over again? I think we would, and here's why. We do believe that core value about diversification. We do believe in an energy portfolio that is robust and full. And I think for us, the notion that we've created something that we now have to refine and bring to bear both all of our lessons, both bad and good, and teach those to a world that is going to need technologies like this is a challenge that our company would welcome and does welcome. And so we are going to take this technology abroad, and if we can find some uses here in the US, we'll do that as well. But our hope is we're going to incubate, improve, make more cost efficient this technology abroad, and when we need it again for our next generation of coal units, then we'll be ready. Meantime, we're going to have 15,000 megawatts of highly controlled coal that we're going to hang on to. We're going to use PRB in part to fuel that. And so our commitment to coal will go long beyond Kemper and what has happened there. So that's our story. I welcome the opportunity to be here. It is a real honor.
We're going to take some questions from the board.
Yeah, thanks a lot for your story, Karl. And it's kind of an impressive story to begin with, and then even as it finishes, considering the investment that the shareholders are making to keep the project going, it becomes an even more impressive story. Just a little bit more information on your carbon capture, kind of how that works, your carbon capture center. Yeah. Could you elaborate a little bit on sort of the scale of that and what you're seeing come through the door as far as the technologies that are out there and what's being looked at? And as you know, Wyoming is trying to look at a way that we can not duplicate what you're doing, but find the niche for Wyoming and how we can, in the state, begin to lay the groundwork for the continued operation of our coal fleet and also the enhancement of our oil industry. So could you help us out with that a little bit?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And interesting moment in touring the facility with some of the folks in the oil and gas industry. We thought they would be interested in sort of the backside cleanup process, but instead they wanted to spend all the time over on the gasifier, because as engineers, they were just fascinated by the gasifier. And I did have some really close pictures of it. It is a very complex beast, and it's very, very large scale. And it has 2 trains, and it is very, very impressive. And for them, everything from here back, they said, we have that. We've seen it before. We know what you're doing. we do it. We probably know how to do it a little better than you do, to which we would probably say, yes, you do. But we're using commercial off-the-shelf technologies to do most of the chemical conversion, Selexol with the CO2. And so what we've got to learn is how to be utility people on this side of the house and chemies on this side of the house and integrate those things to make this thing operate from the moment that lignite, that huge, you can't even see it, but there's a huge pathway up for the lignite. We've got to learn how to operate that in a way that is absolutely seamless, and that is going to be our biggest challenge. We do not think that the technologies, particularly on the backside, are going to be dramatically different in operation from how they are for most of the industry. So we feel like the revolution is the gasifier and the revolution is the integration. So,
Other questions? Dave?
You know, some of the cost footprint and the learning that y'all have gone through and you know, Ben talked about earlier that drives this reported cost up for these plants. Do you have a sense as to, you know, if you're going to commercialize, once you get through all the development cycles and the soft costs and everything else that goes along with that, what does this maybe look like on a cost per kilowatt hour? Not the $12,000 or $11,000, but you know, if you get into a commercializable product or a technology that you can go deliver it out there, is there a vision of what that cost profile looks like going forward?
I think there's some bogeys. I think that we've done some studies, particularly in China, because we are interested in seeing it deployed in China. Without the carbon capture piece, we think the gasifier is $1,400 per kW. That's because you get a lot of local production, you get efficiencies in China that you can get in very few other places in the world. Once you add in carbon capture, and this is the Chinese great fear, which is those costs could maybe double, and as a result, you fall out of competition for supplying on their grid, and you're then in an environmental pursuit. I think that the chart that Ben showed with the arrow, the folks that know far more than me say that chart is in full force and effect here. We can see drop-offs. I think some of our folks would say, blindfolded, I could tell you how to take out a huge portion of this cost, reconfiguring, re-engineering. And remember, that number is for everything. So that's pipeline to get water, that's a CO2 pipeline, that's a mine, that's a lot of capital. But now, we're not going to be the only ones that face that if you decide to do a facility of this size and you want to do CO2. So you can't hide those costs either. But one of the questions you have to ask is, okay, what are those costs? Are they environmental costs? Are they social costs? Are they utility costs? How is it that you ration those between consumers and investors? And I think that's going to be one of the great challenges, because if you think about integrating more with the oil and gas industry on CO2, there's going to be a tremendous need for pipeline development and for methods and means to track and account for the carbon in ways that will ensure that we really do have sequestration. All those things are still in play. So there's still a lot of unanswered questions. They're going to be high cost. I think we can reduce it pretty dramatically. Can we put it in true competition with natural IGCC without carbon capture today? No. Could we be pretty close with IGCC and CO2? I think some in our company would say yes, some would say no. And I think that's going to be the real challenge for us. What's number two look like? Where is it? Did we find all the efficiencies that are possible? And did we choose the right market to get into?
Other questions?
Karl, Zahn, thanks for the presentation. I heard you talk about the technical engineering challenges and the things that your team had to learn that was outside of what they have done historically. Can you also talk about, from a business management, maybe a business model perspective, any substantial differences that you had to grapple and work through?
Yeah, there were some front-end engineering issues that had to do with the uncertainty around CO2 regulation as well, because we started with a fairly low capture goal. I think we started at 15-20%. Over time, over a relatively short time, we went from 20 to 65. The leap up And the re-engineering that we had to do at each of those junctures changed the economics of the project dramatically. We think at 65% that we're hitting the economics right. You might be able to do a little more and still keep your efficiencies. But the re-engineering associated with what in our minds was kind of a moving target. And what we finally ended up with is, well, at the end of the day, we want to match natural gas. And so that's going to be the bogey. That's what we'll pursue. And I think at the end of the day, hopefully, others in the world will benefit from the fact that we went after it and we chased it and hopefully we got it. And that'll tell us whether or not the coal efficiencies are really great enough to do that. I would say too, and there are plenty of people that we can get you connected to in and around the Kemper project. The teams of people that we would assemble and the way that we would do it would probably be different. Reliance on the oil and gas industry earlier rather than later could have helped us with a lot of the process and training that we're going through and some of the delays that we faced here lately. Again, you're building a hybrid. You're building something that doesn't look like what anybody else has ever seen. And, putting a race car and a sidecar, on and saying, let's do 250, sounds like a great idea, but you got to call in a different skill set. And so we probably, and it's funny, some of our visitors from China, I think, have pointed out that they believe that our biggest challenges are going to be operational integration at a level that keeps that thing at very high efficiency rates. And I don't think anybody would disagree with them. I think we just feel confident that a lot of the experience that we gained over at the PSDF through the 20 years of operating that research gasifier is going to help us. So keep your fingers crossed.
So if anybody else has any questions, you can just send those to Holly or myself. We'll make sure they get forwarded to Karl. Karl, we're going to see you
yes.
down in Mississippi and Alabama. Between now and June, we're going to be bringing some of our members of the legislature and other key folks that are engaged in exactly what Southern Company's been engaged in for a long, long time. And we appreciate your support. We appreciate you being here. And we look forward to seeing you again. Let's give Karl a hand, please.
As we say down south, y'all come, okay?